They thought she was walking a dog. That was their first mistake. The trail through Pinecrest State Forest ran 6 miles end to end, cutting through dense Douglas fir and red cedar before opening onto a gravel access road at the northern end. Most people never made it past the first 2 miles. The parking lot saw maybe a dozen cars on a good weekend morning. Hikers, birders, the occasional trail runner. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened. Quiet, predictable, forgotten. Corporal Leigh Harmon, formerly of the United States Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command, honorably discharged 14 months ago after a tour in Syria and a second in Mali, came here every Wednesday morning at 6:30. Not because the trail was particularly beautiful, though it was. Not because the solitude helped her sleep, though it did. She came because Kodiak needed the miles. Kodiak was a Belgian Malinois, 4 years old, 72 pounds of lean muscle and discipline. His left ear had a small notch at the tip, a fragment from a pressure plate device outside Kobani that had taken out 2 of the team's vehicles and given Leigh a scar that ran from her left shoulder blade to the base of her neck. Kodiak had stayed with her the entire 4 hours it took for the medevac to reach them. He had not moved. He had not been commanded to stay. He simply knew. Leigh had gone through the official channels to keep him after discharge. It took 11 months, 3 congressional inquiries, and a letter from her commanding officer. Worth every day. She wore grey running tights, a faded green pullover, and trail runners that were 2 seasons past, needing to be replaced. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical knot. She looked like someone's older sister on a morning off. She looked like exactly nothing to worry about. That was not an accident. Kodiak moved slightly ahead of her on a 6-foot lead, nose working the air, ears pivoting like antennae. He had been tracking something for the last quarter mile. Not prey, not wildlife. He kept angling to the left, toward the tree line, then back toward Leigh, with the particular focused attention that she had learned over 2.5 years of deployment, to trust without question. She kept her pace easy, unhurried. Her eyes moved across the trail ahead, catalogued the gaps in the tree line, noted the gravel access road visible through the firs maybe 300 yards north. A dark green pickup truck was parked at the pullout, had not been there when she arrived 90 minutes ago. She shortened Kodiak's lead to 18 inches. 3 men came out of the tree line. They spread across the trail in the loose formation of people who had done this before, or who thought they had. One on the left was thick through the chest, wearing a red flannel shirt despite the cool morning, a bolt cutter hanging from his right hand like an afterthought. The one on the right was leaner, younger, a hunting knife on his belt, and the kind of nervous energy in his shoulders that made him the most immediately dangerous. The one in the center was the one Leigh looked at last, because he was the one doing the talking, and talkers were rarely the threat. "Morning," the center man said. He had a wide face, pleasant enough, the practiced friendliness of someone who had used pleasantness as a weapon before. He wore a canvas work jacket and kept his hands visible. "Nice dog." Leigh stopped walking. Kodiak did not growl. He sat. That was worse. "Thanks," Leigh said. "What breed is that?" "Shepherd of some kind." "Malinois." "Huh." He tilted his head, looking at Kodiak the way a man looks at something he's already decided to take. "Those things are expensive, right?" "Like trained ones." Leigh felt the geometry of the situation settle into place the way it always did, clear and cold and completely without drama. The bolt cutter, the spacing, the truck parked at the north exit. Red flannel had shifted 3 steps to her left, which put him outside her peripheral vision on that side. The lean one on the right had his thumb hooked near his belt, near the knife. "He's not for sale," Leigh said. The center man smiled. "We're not looking to buy." Kodiak's head tracked slowly to red flannel, who had moved another half step. "Last time I'm going to say this," Leigh said, and her voice was completely level, the way a thermometer is level, just measuring temperature. "Walk back to your truck. Drive north. Don't come back to this trail." The lean man laughed, short and dismissive. "Lady, I'm giving you a courtesy," Leigh said. "You don't have to understand why, you just have to decide whether you're going to take it." The centerman's pleasantness dropped about 2 degrees. "You're alone out here. You're what, 130 pounds? You've got a bolt cutter, a hunting knife, and a friend who's been trying to get behind me for the last 45 seconds. Leigh's eyes were still on the centerman's sternum, not his face. Faces lie, bodies telegraph. "You've got a truck at the north exit, which tells me you planned the egress before you planned the approach. That's not nothing. It means at least one of you has done this before." The trail went quiet enough to hear the furs moving. "What it also means," she continued, "is that at least one of you knows what it feels like when things don't go the way you planned, and that's the part you should be thinking about right now." Red Flannel took another step. "Fass," Leigh said quietly. Kodiak was already moving. He did not bark. He did not posture. 72 pounds of trained military working dog covered the distance to Red Flannel in less than 2 seconds and hit him chest high, driving him off his feet and into the soft earth of the trail shoulder. Red Flannel went down hard, the bolt cutter skittering across the gravel, and Kodiak pinned him with the focused efficiency of an animal that had done this in live combat and understood exactly how much pressure was enough. Leigh was already moving left. The lean man came at her with the hunting knife in an overhead grip, which was wrong. It told her he'd learned to fight from movies, not from someone who actually knew. She stepped inside the arc of his swing, caught his forearm with her left hand, redirected, and used his own momentum to rotate his wrist past the joint's tolerance. The knife hit the ground. The lean man followed it, face first, his arm locked at an angle that made standing up a very poor idea. "Don't," Leigh said, because he was thinking about it. He stopped thinking about it. The centerman had not moved. He stood in the middle of the trail, watching all of this happen in approximately 4 seconds, with the expression of someone whose pleasant mask had finally run out of uses. "Call your dog off," he said. His voice had changed. The friendliness was completely gone now. What was underneath it was something smaller and colder. "No," Leigh said. Kodiak had not released Red Flannel. He was patient in the way that well-trained dogs are patient, not calm, not relaxed, simply waiting for the command that would tell him what came next. "I'll have you arrested," the centerman said. "Unprovoked attack. There's a Garmin GPS watch on my wrist," Leigh said. "It has been recording this trail since I left my car. It recorded you stepping out of that tree line. It recorded where all 3 of you were positioned and when." She paused. "I'm also a federally certified PTSD service animal handler, which means every encounter involving Kodiak is automatically flagged to my care coordinator and timestamped. There are 6 trail cameras between here and the parking lot. 2 of them are mine." None of that last part was a lie. The centerman looked at her for a long moment. He was recalculating. She could see it in the way his jaw worked. "What do you want?" he asked. It was the wrong question, but it was the question people always asked when the script ran out. When the thing they had built in their head, the story where they were larger and she was smaller, and the morning ended the way they had planned it, dissolved into something they couldn't manage. "I want to finish my walk," Leigh said. "And I want you to understand something before you do whatever you decide to do next." She looked at him directly now, and something in her face, some quality that had nothing to do with anger or aggression, made him take a step back. It was the quality of absolute seriousness, the kind that only comes from having been in places where seriousness was the difference between living and not. That dog has served 2 combat deployments. He has been shot at, bombed, and wounded in active duty. He is the most loyal thing I have ever known in my life, and he is the reason I am standing here talking to you instead of doing something else. She let that sit. "You were about to take him from me to use as leverage. I want you to understand that there is no version of that decision that ends well for you. Not legally, not otherwise." Red Flannel had stopped trying to move. The lean man's forehead was still pressed against the gravel. The center man looked at the trail, at the tree line, at the truck visible to the north. He looked like a man doing math he didn't like the answer to. "Lassen," Leigh said, and Kodiak released Red Flannel and came to her left side and sat. Red Flannel lay on the trail shoulder, breathing carefully. He had a bite on his forearm, controlled, precise, enough to hold, not enough to permanently damage. He would have a bruise for a week. He would remember it longer. "Get your friend up," Leigh said to the center man, nodding toward the lean one. "Get in your truck. Leave." They did. She watched the green pickup pull out of the North Access Road and disappear. She stood on the trail for 60 seconds after the sound of the engine faded, cataloging the silence, making sure it stayed silence. Then she looked down at Kodiak. He looked back up at her with the dark, steady attention he had given her since the first day she'd been assigned him in a dusty forward operating base outside of Deir ez-Zor, when he had sniffed her hand, looked at her face, and then simply decided she was worth his time. "Good boy," she said. His tail moved once. She pulled a treat from the small pouch on her waistband. The same duck jerky she had been bribing him with for 3 years, which he accepted with the dignity of someone receiving a well-deserved commendation. She crouched down and put both hands on the sides of his face, the way she only ever did when no one was watching, and pressed her forehead briefly against the top of his broad, warm skull. "You saved my life in Syria," she told him. The same thing she told him every time. Everything after that is just a walk in the park. Kodiak pressed his nose against her jaw, stood up, reset the lead to 6 feet, and turned back south toward the parking lot. The trails was quiet. The firs moved in the morning wind. Somewhere above them a Stella's jay called once and fell silent. Leigh Harmon, formerly of MARSOC, walked her dog home through the forest, and the forest gave nothing away. She hadn't planned to tell anyone. That was how it always went with her. The things that mattered most were the ones she carried the quietest. Her therapist, Dr. Pamela Osei, had been noting this particular pattern in their bi-weekly sessions for almost a year, usually in the gentle, persistent way of someone who has been told to be patient with difficult patients and has, in fact, become patient with them. "You have a tendency," Dr. Osei had said at their last session, "to treat disclosure as a vulnerability rather than a tool." Leigh had thought about that during the drive home from the trail. She thought about it now, standing in her kitchen, watching Kodiak eat his breakfast with the focused contentment of an animal who had no capacity for retrospective anxiety. She envied him that. She made coffee. She sat at the small table by the window that looked out over the side yard, the one with the bird feeder her neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, had given her last Christmas, which she had actually put up because she felt bad not putting it up, and had then discovered she genuinely liked watching the chickadees fight over the sunflower seeds. She called Detective Sergeant Ron Bautista. She had worked with Bautista twice before, once when Kodiak had been brought in as a scent asset for a missing person case, once when a veteran in her county support group had gotten into a domestic situation that needed someone who understood the particular way combat-trained people could get dangerous when they felt cornered. Bautista was one of those police officers who treated information as currency and spent it carefully. She liked that about him. "Harmon," he said, on the second ring, "you're calling before 8. What happened?" She told him about the trail. She told him about the bolt cutter, the truck, the positioning. She told him about the lean man's knife and the center man's hands. "You got a plate on the truck?" Bautista asked. "Oregon plates, partial. 7-7 Foxtrot, dark green late model Chevy Silverado. Extended cab, right rear quarter panel had rust damage in a triangular shape, about the size of a dinner plate." There was a pause on the line that she recognized as the sound of him writing. "You got all that in? What, the 30 seconds before things went sideways? The 40 seconds before things went sideways," Leigh said. "I had extra time." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "You should have called it in immediately." "I know." The bite. Kodiak drew blood. Controlled contact. He'll have bruising. No tendon involvement. You sure? Bautista. I'm sure. Another pause. All right. I'm running the partial. You have the GPS data. Sending it now. The camera footage? Give me an hour. Harmon. His voice shifted slightly, the cop voice dropping toward something more personal. You okay? She looked at Kodiak, who had finished his breakfast, and was now sitting in a square of morning sun on the kitchen floor, watching her with the dark patience of an animal that had learned that when she was on the phone after an incident, it was better to be close. Yeah, she said. I'm okay. It wasn't a deflection, she thought after she hung up. It was just accurate. She was okay. She was okay because of 72 pounds of Belgian Malinois currently absorbing sunlight in her kitchen. She was okay because 14 months of therapy and a morning trail and duck jerky and chickadees at a bird feeder were, collectively, doing something she hadn't believed they'd be able to do when she first got home. She opened her laptop and pulled the camera footage. The images were clear. The three men, the positioning, the bolt cutter catching the morning light as it swung from Red Flannel's hand. The center man's manufactured pleasantness, visible even at 60 meters. The lean man's thumb near the knife, all of it. She exported the files and sent them to Bautista with a time-stamped note. Then she sat back and drank her coffee and watched the chickadees. Bautista called back 40 minutes later. Your partial plate is good, he said. The Silverado is registered to a company called High Timberland Services out of Coos Bay. Company filed for dissolution 6 months ago. Current registered agent is one Douglas Fenwick. 2 priors, both aggravated theft, last conviction 8 years ago. Nothing recent. The company, Leigh said. What did they do? Logging access and rights-of-way consultation. Mostly worked with private timber holders along the coast. He paused. There's a federal case out of Portland. 3 months ago. Someone's been moving equipment through state forest access roads. Not logging equipment. The Forest Service found some of it. Part of it. Enough to know they hadn't found all of it. The access road. The truck positioned at the north exit before they'd come out of the tree line. They weren't just there for me, Leigh said. No, Bautista said. I don't think they were. I think you walked your dog on the wrong morning, Harmon. Or the right one, depending on how you look at it. She looked at Kodiak. He had moved from the sun patch to the kitchen rug and was lying with his chin on his front paws, watching her with the particular expression he wore when he knew something was being decided. Who do I call? She said. Bautista gave her a name. Special Agent Margot Thibodeau, FBI Portland Field Office, the agent running the forest access case. He gave her a number. He told her to let him know what happened. She called Thibodeau. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. Thibodeau had a focused, economical way of speaking that Leigh respected. She asked exactly the questions she needed answered and did not ask the ones she didn't. By the end of the call, she had the GPS file, the camera footage, and Leigh's description of all 3 men, including the triangular rust patch on the Silverado's quarter panel. This is useful, Thibodeau said. It sounded like the understatement it was. Can I ask, were you trained in threat assessment Marines? Leigh said. MARSOC, a brief pause. And the dog is a trained military working dog. Was. Retired. Mine now. I see. Another pause, this one shorter. Harmon, there's a possibility that what happened this morning was an attempt to remove a witness who had seen that access road. We've had 2 other incidents along that trail system in the past 6 weeks. Neither was reported in enough detail to be actionable. How many people? One was a trail runner. He said 3 men questioned him about whether he had a camera. He didn't, so they let him go. The second was a couple on mountain bikes. One of the men pulled a knife. They left their bikes and ran. Leigh thought about that. She thought about the lean man's overhead grip. They're escalating, she said. Yes, what's moving through those access roads? Thibodeau was quiet for a moment. I can tell you that it's significant enough to warrant a federal task force, and significant enough that the people moving it are willing to intimidate witnesses on a public trail at 6:30 in the morning. Leigh understood what that meant without needing it spelled out. "What do you need from me?" What Thibodeau needed from her took 3 days to arrange and involved a meeting at a field office in Portland that smelled like old coffee and industrial carpet cleaner and had a wall-mounted whiteboard covered in a map of Pinecrest State Forest and its surrounding road network. Leigh sat across from Thibodeau, tall, mid-40s, the precise posture of someone who had been told 100 times that it communicated authority and had eventually just internalized it, and 2 other agents whose names she recorded and then released because they hadn't said anything interesting yet. Kodiak lay under her chair. "We have reason to believe the access road at the north end of the Pinecrest Trail is being used as a staging point," Thibodeau said. "The material being moved is stolen, military hardware, broadly speaking. Components that went missing from a depot in Nevada 14 months ago and have been surfacing in pieces along the Pacific coast ever since." 14 months. Leigh's discharge had been 14 months ago. She didn't say that, she filed it. "The 3 individuals from Wednesday morning," Thibodeau continued. "We've identified 2 of them from your footage. Douglas Fenwick, the Silverado registration, and a man named Kurt Abel, 2 prior assault convictions, currently working as a private security contractor out of a company in Medford. The 3rd man, the one in the center, we're still working on him. He's the one who matters," Leigh said. Thibodeau looked at her. Why? He knew about the egress before the approach. He knew to keep his hands visible. He used a disarming social script right up until he dropped it. The other 2 were muscle. He was the one running the operation. Thibodeau nodded slowly. "That's consistent with what we think. What do you want me to do?" What they wanted her to do was walk the trail. Wednesday morning, 6:30, same route, same dog. The trail cameras she owned would be supplemented by federal equipment. 2 agents would be positioned at the parking lot and the north access road. Thibodeau would be in a vehicle on the service road a half-mile east. "We believe they'll try again," Thibodeau said. "You were a loose end from their perspective, an unknown variable. If they're running a staging operation, they need that trail quiet. And if they come at me differently this time," Leigh said. "If they've adjusted, you'll have backup within 3 minutes. 3 minutes was a long time, and all 4 people in the room knew it." "Kodiak," Leigh said, looking at the map, "is a trained bitework dog with 2 combat deployments. He is also a civilian animal, technically speaking, and his involvement in a federal operation creates liability questions." "We're aware," Thibodeau said. "We're not asking Kodiak to do anything. We're asking you to walk your dog." Leigh looked at her for a moment. Then she looked down at Kodiak under her chair. He was watching the map wall with the focused, interested attention he gave to everything new, not threat assessment, just curiosity. The same curiosity he'd had since he was a puppy in training, when he'd treated every new environment like a problem worth solving. "Okay," she said. Wednesday morning was overcast, a thin cloud cover that flattened the light and made the firs look darker and closer than they were. Leigh parked in the same spot at the same time. She clipped Kodiak's lead to the same 6-foot length. She walked the same route. The first mile passed quietly. A flicker called somewhere in the canopy. Kodiak's nose worked the wet air with the methodical patience of an animal built for exactly this. At the 1.5-mile mark, Kodiak angled left, not toward the tree line. Toward the trail ahead, a specific point, maybe 40 yards north. He did it with a precise, low-bodied attention that Leigh knew as scent lock. Not an animal, a person who had been standing somewhere and then moved. She touched her earpiece. Contact sign. North 40 yards. Copy. Leigh shortened the lead and kept walking. They came from the trail this time, not the tree line. 2 of them, red flannel and the lean man with the knife. No center man, no bolt cutter. The lean man had something in his jacket pocket that held the wrong weight, and red flannel was keeping his right hand behind his thigh. Behind his thigh meant a firearm, almost certainly. "You again," red flannel said. He was trying to sound casual. He didn't quite make it. "Me again," Leigh agreed. "We just want the dog," the lean man said. His voice had a tight quality she hadn't heard Wednesday. Nerves or instruction, or both. Walk away and that's it. "Last time," Leigh said, and she meant it in both senses. Red Flannel brought his hand out. What happened next took 11 seconds. Leigh gave Kodiak a command, moved left, put her body between the firearm and the angle of Thibodeau's vehicle approach, controlled the lean man's arm for the second time in a week, and maintained that control while 2 federal vehicles came through the North Access Road in a manner that left very little ambiguity about what was happening. Kodiak had Red Flannel's right wrist in his mouth when Thibodeau crossed the 20 meters from her vehicle to the trail. Not the hand, the wrist. Precise. Controlled. The firearm was already on the ground. "Federal agents," Thibodeau said, which was several seconds past when it needed to be said, but was still technically correct. The third man, the center man, the one who ran the operation, was found at the North Access Road, in the process of moving a trailer loaded with crated equipment toward a secondary vehicle. He offered no resistance. He looked at the agents, and then at Leigh, and then at Kodiak, and something in his calculation finally reached a number he couldn't argue with. His name, it turned out, was Gerald Croft. 3 prior federal charges in 2 states, 2 of which had been pled down to misdemeanors. He had been running the staging operation for 11 months. The crates contained components that matched the Nevada depot manifest almost exactly. Thibodeau stood next to Leigh at the North Access Road while her team processed the scene and watched Kodiak accept a piece of duck jerky with the gravity of a decorated officer receiving a commendation. "He's something," Thibodeau said. "Yeah," Leigh said. "You both are." Leigh looked at the firs, at the morning light coming through the cloud cover and making the access road look almost peaceful, at the federal vehicles and the agents and the crates being logged and tagged and moved. She thought about Deir ez-Zor and the pressure plate and 4 hours on the ground waiting for the medevac, while Kodiak pressed himself against her left side and did not move. She thought about the first morning she'd walked this trail, 14 months ago, when she'd been so exhausted she'd had to sit down on a fallen log a mile in and breathe through the particular kind of nothing that follows a homecoming nobody prepares you for. Kodiak had sat beside her on that log. He had leaned his warm weight against her leg. He had waited the way he always waited, without asking anything, without needing anything, just being present in the uncomplicated and complete way that only dogs can manage. She'd thought then, "I will get up when he thinks I should get up." He had stood after 10 minutes, shaken himself off, and looked at her. She'd gotten up. That was how it had gone for 14 months, trail by trail, day by day. A bird feeder she didn't expect to like, a detective who asked the right questions, a therapist who was patient in the right way, a dog who had already given everything once and was improbably still here. "You have a way of ending up in the middle of things," Thibodeau said. "So does he," Leigh said, looking at Kodiak. He was watching her the way he always watched her. Dark eyes, steady attention, the slight forward tilt of the ears that meant he was ready. She unclipped his lead. He stayed beside her anyway.